Hello and welcome to our last guide on these Crimson Kurt minis. Today we're going to be working on the captain of the warband, and as I've done in the previous guides, I have base coated everything. Well, the most important details, so we can get this done a little bit faster. Let's start painting the armor, because it is the hardest and biggest detail on the model. And I base coated it with AK Burnt Black. Burnt red. So let's highlight this by using AK Deep Red. The color I have on the armor right now is not necessarily my darkest shadow. I might go a little bit darker in a few areas. This is a complex area to paint in non-metallic due to the fact that none of these volumes is really sharp, which they're all very rounded, which means that light doesn't really have a chance to be super sharp. But we're gonna do our best. So I'm gonna start by thinning this color and then interpreting the volumes on the armor, the main ones at least, so I can get an idea of how the metal is gonna work. So for example, if the light is coming from this direction, which is where the model is looking from, I can start building up our light accordingly. And again, I don't have much of a chance to go too dark or too light out of the gate because, well, first off, I'm working with a red, so it's always complex to work with this paint in a way that makes it look red. But also because the volumes on this model are not too sharp. There is a little bit of sharpness here in the knee and stuff like that, but it's not exactly ideal for non-metallic. But we are going to do our best. I'm probably going to have to switch the color out though, because this one has very little coverage, which means it's a good thing actually, but it also means that we're going to have to sit here for a long time. Maybe not. Okay. So I'm starting by building up the volume of light, just very gently. Getting my highlights in. You can see it here on the leg. And overall, we're going to build it all across this armor. So for now, I am layering. You can see that even though it took me a little while to get the highlights to cover, the positive outcome is that if I could layer them very nicely, very cleanly, which means I don't really need to blend. This is a good characteristic of AK paints. If you thin them a little bit, they lose coverage, but they remain fairly cohesive when it comes to pigmentation, which means you can layer and glaze with them very, very well, and they give you a pretty good blend out of the gate. So we can move up in light. Now, since we're working on a vampire, I would like to have a cold light hitting his armor, or at least a cold feeling to it. We will always have a more warm light in the strongest light, but for now, I'm good with this. So I'm going to be using Sky Blue from Vallejo Motocolor. Sorry, my dog went crazy. So anyway, with Sky Blue, we can add it to our deep red. We don't need too much Sky Blue, just enough to lighten up the deep red. And you can see that we have a pinkish red color. And I do like this coldness, so with this color here, we can start building up another highlight inside of the previous one. Now, it's very important that we keep this highlight small, because I can actually go a little bit lighter, because we are working with reds, so it's very simple and easy to make them turn into pink. We don't really want that. We want to maintain the saturation of red. But we are also working on a metallic object, so we do need the light in it to really feel metallic. So for now, let's just build up this color here very gently inside of the area of the previous highlight. We have built up the highlights based on two things: the light source, which in this case is coming from the front of the model, and the volume. So, for example, this leg here is going to be a cylinder, but the top part of the cylinder will basically be a sphere because of the calf, enlarging the armor. So it's very important to understand what volume you're working on. In all cases, not just when painting the metallic, but especially when painting the metallic, because this technique is all about volumes. So we are getting our stronger light. Just placing it down for now. Okay, now that we have the color blocked in, you can see the armor is extremely pink. We can add a bit more red to it. Try to blend it in. And then we're going to be glazing over the lights with our red to get them to be a bit more reddish. So for now, I'm just placing an in-between mix of the deep red highlight we used and these second highlights that we have mixed. And this mix here will just act as a blending mechanism, basically. We can place it gently in between this color and the other, and they will be blending together a bit more, giving us an easier time glazing later. So the blending we have is not perfect, but should work, should be enough for our glazing. I'm gonna go back to the red, the AK red we used, and I'm gonna thin it quite a bit, and basically make use of its low coverage by glazing it over the highlights that we just painted. It's gonna reduce them a little bit in brightness, but it is in turn gonna give us more of a reddish hue to them, which is exactly what we need here, because we don't want this armor to turn into pink. Like Games Workshop painted this guy and all of the other guys with armors like this one, basically with a base coat red and then just little dots of white to suggest glossiness in the armor. They didn't really go all the way into highlighting it, and that's a trick to work around having to work on red, but you can work on red, and we're gonna. It's gonna just take a little longer than most color would when it comes to non-metallic, because there is a little bit of a back and forth happening between colors. You need to make sure that you have red as a mid-tone and not some other color. So as you can see, I am reducing the strength of the light, but all of a sudden this leg is looking metallic. Or I mean, shiny. Not really metallic yet, we need more lights, but shiny. So that's a good point to start from. We can keep working from here. The effect is already sorta happening. And again, like, just try to understand. Red is a difficult color to work on. I will, of course, make a getting out of tabletop guide on it, like as a preview for that guide. Red is a difficult color to work on because it's the color in which the midtone matters the most. Other colors you can get away losing the midtone or changing its color a bit too much. You can still get away with it. Red, you cannot. If you change the midtone of red even by a little bit, it doesn't look red anymore because we have different names for shades of red. Magenta, as we call it, is a dark red, but we call it magenta. A light red is pink. So, like, because of culture, we have turned the color red into a very, very specific hue, which means that the moment we move away from it, we lose it. And it's a culture thing. It's not an artist thing. It's not a color thing. It's purely cultural. But we gotta live with it because art is part of culture and we can't ignore it. The same way if you paint red and green together, there's a very high chance people will like, oh, that's Christmassy because, you know, red and green together mean Christmas to people. All right, so with this, we can go lighter. I'm going to be using sand yellow from AK. These are very light yellow, and we can use it to push our highlights on our red. Basically taking the red. If I add, if I add a sand yellow to the red, I get an orangish color, which basically is a skin tone color. Like you could paint skin with this, and nobody would notice it. But in this case, it's acting as an highlight to our non-metallic red. So I'm gonna be playing around with the edges a little bit. Because the edge is what's gonna give us the metallic look. And then we can have also little dots of light. We need to keep these small because of the red mid-tone. So rather than having one big highlight to suggest the metallicness, we can have a few. Again, the biggest issue here is the pastelization of the light. So now that we have locked it in, we're gonna go back to our red and glaze it even harder this time because we really need our red to shine through. So we're going to be painting over these edges and these volumes of light with our red, which is going to tint them more towards red and give us a reddish feeling. After this, we are going to be playing with shadows to get contrast. Because of course, since we're working on a red, we can't really go much light, because if we do, we lose the redness. So the best option we have is to instead work on the shadows. So we're gonna be glazing our red to get vibrancy back. And, you know, the edges are still interpreted because we have painted them. So everything has been interpreted properly. Now we can work on pushing the volumes and the values as well by darkening everything a little bit. Because that's gonna be the way to do this armor. I had a few ideas about this armor, but as I paint it, I understand that this is not exactly super suited to paint non-metallic red. So rather than go for a very light non-metallic, because of the volume, it's just not. I mean, it's gonna work, but it's gonna take forever. So I don't think this model is suited for the AD I have. I'm gonna rather go and play with the darkness. So as we have this color here, I'm gonna be getting AK purple, mix it with black, so we have a basically black purple color, and I'm gonna thin it quite a lot because we're gonna glaze again. We're gonna be glazing this color in the shadows. We're working with a black, so make sure you thin it properly because this color has a lot more coverage than you might think. Also, clean the brush on a paper towel so you can work comfortably with this glaze. And now I'm gonna do the opposite thing I've done so far, which is I'm going to be getting my shadows defined a bit more, so that by darkening a few areas of the model, I can get myself contrast, which is gonna help us in our quest for non-metallic. Because non-metallic is all about volume interpretation and contrast, which means we have done our job with the volumes by placing the light properly. So now the second job is to get contrast. So wherever I can, I'm gonna sneak in a little bit of this black glaze. Doesn't have to be like a massive amount of it. Just needs to be enough so that it can push back against the reds. And in doing so, give us contrast. All right. So a few areas work, others don't. The one that doesn't really is this one, because we need more contrast there and also a bit more red there. So we either go lighter or darker. I am gonna go darker in a sense that I'm gonna tone these highlights more towards red, because this area is technically an area of shadow because the light is hitting the front of the model very sharply, right? So we can make use of this part of the chest to get ourselves an even better feeling of red by having an intenser red in that area. It's gonna justify our slightly less intense reds in other areas because they're gonna look lit up. So with our yeah, it's all a matter of cleaning up the edge lights that we have done by turning them slightly more reddish and then doing one last very strong highlight to suggest a glistening color. Okay. So now in the areas of light where we have a connection between corners, it's gonna be easier to show you than talk about it. Wait, my paint is stuck. Okay. So we're gonna be using Chimera White with a bit of the yellow added to it. And we're gonna be placing this color in all areas of juncture. So for example, the tip here, see? Or here. Or here. Or here even. We're gonna play around with contrast in a bit of a cheatsy way, because this model has, as I said, not very good volumes for non-metallic, but it does have a lot of details, which means we can make use of them by placing this white very gently, very small, in all of the areas of connection. And corners of the model. Okay, this doesn't mean we're done. We can glaze this color a bit more to get that volume right. So after placing the dot of light, we can play around with it a little bit with glazes of this color. So rather than having a blocked in paint, we can kind of create a misty a misty surrounding for it that's gonna help create the illusion of a bloom of light. Some of the edges can also be stronger, especially the ones uh, facing the light source more directly. Okay, now we gotta just do a lot of work just blending this color in with our original red and glazing over it again. As you see, we can't really show much contrast due to the fact that, as I said, red is a finicky color, so you gotta play around with colors more than values when working with red. Okay. Feels like I like the armor now. I'm just gonna be strengthening my red a little bit by adding burnt red to it. And do one gentle glaze in the mid-tone area. Because right now it feels like my red... I mean, it just feels like the mid-tones are still a bit pinkier because of the low coverage of my AK red. So if I can just a little bit get them to be more reddish, we're good. When painting red, there is always a lot of problem solving involved. Lots of it. And due to the nature of my Patreon, which is almost unedited painting, so you see and hear the whole process of painting the model, it might look like I am stumbling in the dark a little bit in doing this armor. The truth is that I am not. Like, I know exactly what color I want and how exactly to achieve it. The only problem is that every model is different. So you don't always get to be absolutely certain of where a color goes unless you try things out a little bit first. It's part of the trial and error method that I use in my painting, which basically allows me to be carefree when it comes to mistakes because they are part of the process in my mind. And you can see that. Now the armor feels red. It has a good shininess to it. I don't know still if I do... Huh. No, I feel like we're good. I don't really feel the need to... we could... We could... Again, we could cheat a little bit and redo our edges in an orange, basically. So I'm going to be using light orange from AK. Because it does feel like the edges aren't as defined as they should be. So I'm going to add a bit of white to this light orange. Okay. Lastly, we're going to use an ink. Just give me a second. We're going to be using Nafton Crimson from Liquitex to glaze over the entirety of the armor, push the redness once more, and we should be done with it. I'm gonna thin this color just a little bit. I'm gonna thin this color just a little bit. And glaze it over the armor to get a full red feeling out of it. Because I do want the armor to be red. Like, really red. Alright, let's get to work on the skin tone. The skin tone was base coated the very same way I did all the other skin tones, this time a little bit lighter. Warm gray from AK, olive green from AK, and black mixed together to create. I can do it again if you want. You can see I have a bit of a greenish gray here. I can add black to it. And this is our mid-tone. So from this, we're going to be lightening up, and creating our various highlights. I'm going to be adding warm gray to this color. I'm not going to be using pure gray like I did in the last guide, just for the sake of changing the skin tones a little bit between each other. So I'm going to be adding warm gray to this mix, and we're going to pick out all of the areas of mid-tone pretty much, so the non-shadow area. The top of the fingers, for example. Bit difficult to paint these faces because the model forces you to fully assemble them, and the face is always hidden by some detail, but you can see that I'm layering the color as I did for the red originally, so I won't really need to blend this in. I can just paint one layer and then reinforce it gently, and it's gonna blend itself. This is a very fast way of painting. It does require a little bit of understanding of how to thin the paint. If you do want me to make a video on the super layer, let me know. I can do it. Okay, now that we have this color in, we can bring some light to it with light blue. We want the skin to appear fairly colder in the mid-tones. This is a mid-tone of light, but with this lighter color, we can paint it inside of the area of the previous one without entirely going over it. So we don't want to get rid of the mid-tone, we just want to enhance it with this light here. Gently placing the color. Don't worry too much about coverage in the first pass, just place it. You will get coverage and blending in the second pass. And now, after thinning the paint just a little bit more, we can drag the pigment towards the lights that we have just placed, and this gives us the blend we want. And then we can use ice yellow if we want to use it from previous guides, or we can just add Chimera white with the sand yellow to make a very light color. We can thin it, and we can play around with it to place our strongest light. Force it. To get that strong glint of light. There we go. Okay, so next up we can use our purple. We can thin it. And with the thin purple, we can kind of layer it in or glaze it in, however you want to call it. I am layering. In the shadow of our skin to just, have a bit more color happening on this model. It's very subtle, but it does have an effect, and it does improve the quality as well. Okay, we can always go back to our mid-tone or one of the lights to rescue them if we feel like our glazing has gone a bit too far and covered areas that we didn't want to cover. But overall, I am happy with how this looks, so I will just try to reinforce a little bit the light on the forehead here, because this feels a little bit wrong. So I'm gonna build up the light a little bit more in this area here. just to have it blend into the strongish yellowish light we have on the top. Okay. With this done, we can move on to the weirdish gold. And we started base coating with English uniform from Vallejo model color with a lot of black added to it. And this is our result. I'm gonna keep moving forward by using English uniform in its purity. And this color will be our mid-tone. So I am just layering it on like I have done so far with most of the colors I've used. I'm not particularly interested in coverage, I just block in the color gently. Of course, you do want to unload the brush on a paper towel before you take it to the model, because otherwise it might flood. But as we add this color, I also reckon the reds will improve in quality because we are removing the black from, or the dark colors anyway, from the areas around it, getting ourselves a bit more of a overall contrast happening on the model, which in turn gives our reds more power. Although I might go back and strengthen the shadow on the red a little bit. Like, I feel like I would like a bit more darkness. It's not strong enough. Because an alternative would be to, well, it's not really an alternative, but like one way to paint this armor could be to paint it in a, make it look like a very dark red armor. And that might fit the model more than the red we currently have, because the red we currently have is a bit of a space marine red. I don't know how to explain it. It doesn't feel evil, you know what I mean? So we might want to play around with our red a little bit more. I'll think about it as I base coat. Well, not really base coat, as I highlight these golds. Okay, now to highlight, I'm gonna be using ice blue. You guessed it. You can see that you can make some very interesting paint jobs by keeping simple color schemes. Like you don't have to use 6,500 paints as long as you have a light color, like in this case ice blue and sky blue and ice yellow, and mid tones that have adequate saturation to them. You can play around with things a lot. You don't really need to have like a scale of colors to be able to achieve a paint job. You can just play around with the saturation and the light. So like now that we have this lighter color, we're going to be sketching in and painting it inside of the area of our previous highlight. So very gently, we're going to be highlighting you see that we have placed our first layer of this color, which is not fully covering, but we can make this cover a little bit more by doing another layer and also blend at the same time. Wait. So we're going to be repeating exactly the same step with a slightly thinner paint, directing it towards the area where we painted the highlight. This is going to give us a blend and also reinforce the light at the same time. Even lighter using our white-yellow mix to do our last highlight, which is going to be our edge highlight, as well as the strongest light in a few of the areas. Okay. And with this, we're done. I do like this gold as it is. We did lose a bit of the mid-tone in doing the first bluish, blue-yellow highlight, but I actually don't mind it. I could go back to the ochre and glaze it, but honestly, I don't mind it. I do like how this looks like. So yeah, we can call it. We can call it when it comes to this gold color. It's a nice, interesting. It almost looks like an antique silver, which is not something I mind, honestly. It's good. I like it. All right, next up we have the cape and the hairs to do, and then the blade, and then we're done. So I will see you in a moment. All right, so let's work on the cape. The cape is going to be fairly easy. We have already base coated it with a mix of ocean blue from AK and black. This is our base coat mix. Now, for the inner side of the cape, all we gotta do is just go a little bit darker, because the color we have is already working as an highlight. So by adding more black to the base coat color, we can create ourselves a layer paint that is darker. So, okay, so this is not darker, so I'm just recoating the base coat to get full coverage. Okay, now we can go darker with straight up black, actually. And gently wet blend it in into our cape to get ourselves the right amount of darkness. You probably can't see very well, and unfortunately, the difference is going to be noticeable in pictures, because these are very dark colors, and it's difficult to show them. This is pretty much it when it comes to the front. The back, we can just make it even darker by glazing a very, very dark mix of the color in all of the areas except where the volume is protruding forward. So for now, we can just sketch in the shadows, basically. Like so. You see? And all we gotta do is use our original base coat to kind of blend it in. The model is incredibly busy on its own. No need to do any fancy tricks on it. Okay. We can use a bit of sky blue to do the edges here. Very simple interpretation, but it's not always necessary to go ham on a detail. We can maybe use this lighter color to push a little bit the volumes here in the top part of the cape. But I'm not really looking for much contrast in this area. I'm just looking to interpret the volume, and that's it. And of course, we can go back to the original color, the original mid-zone, and wet blend it in, or glaze over it, or whatever method we prefer. In this case, I am glazing over it to get it to blend with the rest of the paint job. Okay, what we're left with is the blade, and uh, and then we're done. There are other elements on the model, but they're very simple and very not interesting in a way to explain. So yeah, let's do the blade. Um, I want the blade to be fairly dark, so I'm gonna base coat it with a mix of ocean blue and black. The same, basically the same one we had used for the first highlight on the cape. And the trick to make this blade look dark would be to maintain the light very, very sharp. So small highlights, nothing crazy going on with the lights. I do need, in all of these, I am thinking how to make the red armor look more interesting. And the more I paint the model, the more I feel like the best way to do it is to darken it quite a bit and play around with the darkness rather than the light. Alright, so with this very, very, very dark base coat, we can add sky blue to it. And again, the objective would be to keep the lights sharp. So I definitely want to reflect a bit of the teal of the blade, of the base, sorry, onto the blade here. So I think it would be interesting to have an highlight here. And then we can, of course, bounce it all the way here. And maybe here in darkness, we can have a bit of a rounded highlight to suggest a bloom, light hitting the bloom. And on the opposite side, we're painting the highlight pretty much the same way, just in a different position. So they have shadow. This is a very simple start. All we're going to do is blend it, so we can choose whatever method we prefer. I'm going to be wet blending it with the original base coat color, because this paint is still wet, so we can quickly blend it in very easily, as you can see. Right? And we can sketch in an even stronger highlight by uh, adding white and a little bit of yellow to warm the highlight up. And this will be our strongest highlight, which is gonna land here. And of course on the edges. Okay. Let's blend this in. I do feel like the light could be a little bit lighter in a few areas, so I am using not the strongest highlight we have mixed, but basically a slightly weaker version, which is more of the previous color mixed into it. Because I do want, I do would like a bit more reflections happening here. Even though we want the blade to overall appear dark, we still need the non-metallicness to shine through. Otherwise, it's pointless. Okay, and now with pure white, we can do the strongest reflection points. Okay. Just gotta clean up the blends, so I will show you how I do it, and the way I do it is by simply creating in between mixes of whatever part of the process I don't like the blending of, and use that in between mix as a glaze to create a filter over the transition that is lacking, so that this filter acts as a blending mechanism. And you can do this until your eyes fall out, in a sense that if you really are methodical, you will always find a blend to fix. It is up to you to decide when to stop. I will be doing this a bit more off camera just to clean up the model, but this is how I do it. All right, with that done, we can move on to well, honestly, yeah, okay. Let's clean up the armor. So the armor is a very difficult topic to discuss, as we have understood. I'm just gonna mix a very dark red, so burnt red plus black, and I'm gonna thin it into oblivion. I need to darken the whole armor, I feel like. So with this darker color, we can glaze it over the armor. The highlights we have done are still gonna shine through because it's still a glaze. But I do want to turn our lights a little bit more into red because I needed to create contrast versus the very bright, high value color of the goldish we have done. And I believe that having a dark armor against it is more interesting than having a very saturated one. So because of this, I am going back to darken the whole thing. Yeah, I already feel like it's better. This is also going to improve the blending, by the way, so not only is it going to achieve the effect we wanted to achieve, but it's also going to help blend, because applying this glaze is basically creating a filter that is going to help blend everything together a bit more. Yeah, much better actually. Much better. It's a lot more moody. And it contrasts with the gold a lot more. I like it. Now with pure black, again, very, very thin, I'm going to be reinforcing some of the shadows. I am sitting on this armor a little bit more than usual because I understand that it is the defining detail of this model, in a sense that if you're watching a guide about this model, you are very likely to be interested in the painting of the red armor. So I am trying to make this armor look very good because I know that people watching this guide will be looking into understanding the painting of red, and I hope that my 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 efforts here are helping you understand what to look for and how to see things. Like in this case, the red wasn't bad per se, but in contrast with the skin tone, in contrast with the other details, was lacking because it felt a bit too red, too intensely red. It wasn't really playing into the mood of the rest of the details because the gold is very desaturated, the leathers are very dark, the blade is very dark, the skin is very desaturated. That powerful red didn't feel like it belonged very much. So I am instead deciding to leave red as a strong ally locally and instead play around with the shadows. So I am moving the painting from highlight to low light, making it a little bit more moody, which is, I feel, the right take on a model like this one. Chimera Black is great for glazing when it comes to blacks. Highly suggest it. It is the best black I've found so far when it comes to glazing. Really, really, really easy to glaze compared to other blacks. So yeah, just going around the model and pushing the shadows. Just making the armor look dark where needed. Yep, I like it. I like it. All right. All the other details on this model have already been discussed about on other minis, like the hair or the boots and stuff like that. So I don't think it's necessary to go through with them in this guide. I have already bombarded you with content this month. So I guess I will see you in the next video. So thank you so much for watching. Have a fantastic day, and bye-bye.